In the late 1980 seconds, on a basalt cliff outside Springerville, Arizona, an archaeologist clearing vines found a spiral staircase cut into the rock. He followed the fissures down, rappelling past sunbathing rattlesnakes, and came out inside a system of burial chambers. They are the only catacombs known in the prehistoric American West. That cliff is in Arizona, and it is not the strangest thing we found there. That place makes this list, so do 10 others. A hole in the ground beside a 1,000-year-old Pueblo that breathes in and out with the weather. A tower of solid mud, with a window cut to catch a moonrise that comes around once every 18 years. A pool of desert water that nothing with gills has ever survived. Stick with us to the end, because number 1 is a man buried in turquoise from head to foot beneath the floor of a room full of garbage. This channel is about the places history filed and forgot. If that is your kind of thing, subscribe. Today we are counting down 11 ancient sites in Arizona that scientists can't explain. Number 11, Wupatki, Pueblo, north of Flagstaff, an open high desert grassland. The hole that breathes. In the early 1100 seconds, after Sunset Crater erupted and left behind cinder that held moisture in the soil, people stacked red sandstone into a settlement of 104 rooms. Beside it, they built a ball court, the northernmost court of its kind, known in America, a form far more common thousands of miles to the south. A few feet from that court is a hole in the ground that breathes. Air moves in and out of it depending on temperature and pressure, sometimes leaving at 30 miles an hour. It connects to a fracture system with a volume above 7 billion cubic feet. In 1965, cavers got 18 feet down before the passage pinched shut. Researchers once injected radioactive powder into one blowhole and checked openings up to 44 miles away for traces. They got results. Then they threw them out, because one of the researchers had contaminated the test sites. The true extent of the system underneath is still unknown. The Hopi call it Huakyangwikiat. A shrine stood beside it until visitor traffic forced its removal. Whether the builders chose this spot because of the vent has never been settled. You can still lean over it and feel it exhale. Nobody ever had to explain it to the people who prayed there. Number 10. The Crane Petroglyph Heritage Site. In the Verde Valley near Rimrock, known for most of its modern life as V-Bar V. One sandstone bluff above Wet Beaver Creek carries over 1,000 pecked figures, cranes, dancers, cornstalks, spirals, southern Sinagua work, made between roughly 1150 and 1400. 2 rocks are wedged in a crevice above the panel. Through the year, they throw narrow, parallel shadows down the rock face, and those shadows move at a rate you can predict. Somebody worked that out. Then they pecked glyphs at the exact points the shadow edges land on key dates. On the summer solstice, the line between shade and sunlight arrives precisely at the end of a zigzag figure, with 2 dots marking the first and last days to plant corn. The panel survived because the ranchers who ran cattle here from around 1900 left it alone. The Forest Service acquired the site in a land swap in 1994. Here is the part that lands strangely. 11 of those glyphs are calendar elements. The volunteers who guide visitors can talk for a full hour about those 11. About the other 1,300, they know almost nothing. You can stand a few feet from all of it, close enough to touch, and read roughly 1%. Number 9. Sears Point. On the Gila River in Yuma County, about 36 miles west of Gila Bend. You leave Interstate 8 at exit 78, and the pavement ends almost immediately. 8 miles of graded dirt later, there is a parking area beside a riverbed that is usually dry sand under a 2-mile wall of black volcanic basalt. There are more than 2,000 rock art panels here, carrying close to 10,000 individual carved elements spread across more than 4,000 acres. Archaeologists consider it one of the most significant rock art sites in the Southwest. There is no developed trail system, Visitors are advised to bring GPS so they can find the car again. This place is a bottleneck. The Gila Corridor is one of the only workable routes across one of the driest deserts in North America, and people have walked it for something on the order of 10,000 years. Everyone who came through added to the rock. The trailhead kiosk lists 3 separate carving traditions, the earliest running back to around 10,500 BCE. The Anza expedition passed on the North Bank in 1775. After that came missionaries, California-bound wagons, and the Butterfield Overland Mail. And here is the problem. The BLM states outright on its own signage, petroglyphs cannot be radiocarbon dated. There's no reliable way to know how old most of this is. There's more up on the mesa than the panels. Sleeping circles, rock alignments, geoglyphs, and footpaths worn so deeply into the desert pavement that researchers ended up photographing them from a hot air balloon just to see the pattern. It has been proposed that they resemble the ceremonial roads running to Chaco Canyon. That remains a proposal. 10,000 messages out there, and not one of them addressed to us. Number 8. Perry Mesa, inside Agua Fria National Monument, between Phoenix and Prescott. Flat, open grassland on top, reaching about 4,500 feet, torn open by black basalt canyons that drop hundreds of feet to the Agua Fria River, a river 129 miles long that you cannot hear from the mesa surface at all. More than 450 prehistoric sites are recorded here. Some of the stone pueblos hold 100 rooms or more, and the large ones are placed on the edge, right on the escarpment rim above a vertical drop, with slits cut into the walls to watch the approaches. The origin is a migration. In the late 1200 seconds, the Four Corners emptied out under a catastrophic drought, and people moved south, looking for water that still ran. The canyons here had seeps at the bottom. The mesa tops had nothing. They built up top anyway, several thousand of them, engineering rock-lined terraces and rainwater capture to farm ground that should not have supported farming. A Museum of Northern Arizona article once described the result as a prehistoric gated community. The unresolved question is what they were watching for. The villages are positioned so they can see one another across the canyons. A line-of-sight network built by people who clearly expected to need to signal each other. Archaeologists have proposed a defensive alliance. Nobody has produced the enemy. The big pueblos were only documented properly in the 1,930 seconds by J.W. Simmons, an amateur from Prescott, working on a federal writer's project wage. By around 1500, the network was empty. Wupatki and Hopi people later lived on this ground and met the first Spanish arrivals here. There is no visitor center on the mesa, no reconstruction, no fee, no supervision. You walk out across the grass, and eventually a wall appears at your feet. Whatever they were waiting for, they arranged things so they would be waiting for together. Number 7. Nobody knows what it was for. That is not a teaser. That is the National Park Service's official position, printed on a sign epicite. Casa Grande stands near Coolidge in Pinal County, on dead flat Sonoran Desert between the Gila and Santa Cruz rivers. 4 stories of unreinforced caliche mud. The base measures roughly 60 feet by 40. The walls are close to 4 feet thick and have stood through centuries of wind and rain. The ground floor is packed solid with earth, apparently to carry the weight above it. The 4th story held a single central room. It is the only pre-Columbian building of its type in existence. Then there are the holes. The walls are squared to the compass. Openings near the top of the east and west walls line up with the sun at the summer solstice and at both equinoxes. And one aligns with the moon when it reaches a particular point in a cycle that repeats every 18.61 years. Consider what that requires. An event that comes around once every 18.5 years cannot be caught by watching for a season. Whoever cut that hole was working from records, kept across at least one generation, and possibly several. The builders, the ancestral Sonoran desert people, had already spent 1,000 years digging over 100 miles of irrigation canal without metal tools. Then, in the early 1,300 seconds, they built this. Within roughly 150 years, the world it belonged to had come apart. Eusebio Kino documented the ruins in 1694. It became the first archaeological site the United States government ever protected, set aside in 1892, and made a national monument in 1918. Observatory, granary, watchtower, priest residence. Every one of those is a guess. Nearly 90,000 people walked up to it last year and left carrying the same question the Park Service has. Number 6. Cherry Creek Road runs 40 miles through some of the most remote terrain in Arizona, along the eastern edge of the Sierra Ancha Wilderness. From the Mesa top down to the creek is a drop of about 4,000 feet, and the side canyons cutting into that mesa have vertical walls. Inside those canyons, halfway up, there are villages. Stone slabs and blocks set in mud mortar, plastered over, with roofs and floors of heavy timber beams layered with branches, grass, earth, and stone. Devil's Chasm, Pueblo Canyon, Canyon Creek, Cold Springs, Cooper Forks. Collectively, the Cherry Creek ruins. Around 1280, while the northern Southwest was collapsing under drought, central Arizona was still fertile and people moved in. Some of them chose this. Not a defensible hilltop, a crevice, halfway up a cliff, reached by a route where a slip is fatal, with the farmland somewhere far below. Tree ring dating of the construction timbers gives a window of about 70 years. 1280 to 1350. Built, lived in, and emptied in less time than a long human life. Here's what nobody can settle. The dates say Solido, the pottery, the tools and elements of the architecture say Mogollon. This ground sits on the boundary of three traditions, Mogollon to the east, Hohokam to the west, Sinagua to the north, and the people in these cliffs match none of them cleanly. One suggestion is that they were an older or hybrid community, holding on to their own ways while the Salado world grew up around them. Archaeologists eventually stopped arguing and named them after the mountains, the Anchan tradition. It is a placeholder. The density is the detail. Virtually every south-facing overhang in these canyons, with enough flat ground to stand on, has a structure in it. The limit on how much they built was the geology, not the people. Almost nobody reaches them, which is why standing walls, original plaster, and roof timbers are still up there. No signage, no supervision. High clearance, four-wheel drive to get close, then a scramble where hand lines are sometimes rigged on the last quarter mile. They chose the hardest possible address on the continent and made it beautiful. We opened this video with Casa Malpais. Let us know in the comments if that one caught you off guard. If you're enjoying the deep dive, a thumbs up genuinely helps these stories find people. It gets stranger from here. Number 5. There is a pool of water in the Arizona desert that nothing can drink. Montezuma Well sits near Rimrock in the Verde Valley, a detached unit of Montezuma Castle National Monument. It is a collapsed limestone sinkhole and about 1.5 million gallons of water surface in it every single day, welling up through vents in the floor. The temperature holds between roughly 64 and 77 degrees. Year-round, drought or no drought. Around 1,100 gallons a minute leave through a natural tunnel to Wet Beaver Creek. There are no fish in it, not one, and not because something ate them. The water carries dissolved carbon dioxide at more than 80 times the concentration of ordinary fresh water. It is alkaline. It carries arsenic. Nothing with gills has ever managed it. What did manage it is stranger. At least 5 species live in Montezuma Well and nowhere else on Earth. A diatom, a spring snail, a water scorpion, an amphipod, and a leech. That is the highest count of endemic species of any spring in the southwestern United States. The spring snail deliberately stays in the highest carbon dioxide zones, apparently because nothing that would eat it can follow. The chemistry explains it. Water spends something like 10,000 years underground before it surfaces here, collecting carbon dioxide and arsenic on the way. What comes out never floods and never really changes, and it is hostile to almost everything alive. Anything that adapted was then locked in, with no competitors and no predators arriving from outside. Evolution in a sealed jar. Here is the detail that stops people cold. The leeches in that pool carry the highest concentration of arsenic ever recorded in a living organism. And in the late afternoon, the amphipods rise into the daylight to feed on algae, because the alternative is the leeches. Researchers say it is the only migration pattern like it anywhere, and it involves two species that exist nowhere but here. The Sinagua build dwellings into the sinkhole wall and cut an irrigation ditch from the outlet, which you can still trace. The Yavapai regard the well as the place through which they emerged into the world. You come up a dry slope and it is not there and not there, and then it is flat, blue-green, and completely silent because nothing ever rises to feed. Number 4. In 1966, two University of Arizona researchers walked north from a known mammoth kill site in the San Pedro Valley, extending their mapping. In a single afternoon, they found two more concentrations of mammoth bone, that is, Murray Springs, near Sierra Vista, over 5 field seasons, from 1966 to 1971. It turned out to be one of the richest Paleo-Indian sites ever excavated, 5 separate kill and butchery stations. A hearth. An almost fully articulated adult mammoth, bones of bison, horse, camel, and direwolf. The BLM has called it the largest single sample of Clovis flint knapping yet known in the western United States. The stratigraphy here runs undisturbed for the past 40,000 years. And sitting directly on top of the Clovis material is a layer of dark gray to black carbonaceous clay up to 8% carbon. The black mat? Below it, mammoths and hunters, and thousands of stone flakes. Above it, none of that. No points. No megafauna. No people. It caps the whole thing like a lid, dated to roughly 12,900 years ago. The same layer has now been identified at over 50 sites across North America. In 2007, a team published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences arguing that the mat marked an extraterrestrial impact. A cosmic airburst that triggered the Younger Dryas cold snap, killed the megafauna, and ended the Clovis world. Murray Springs was one of their sites. In 2010, a second team published in the same journal, having resampled the same layer at the same site. No iridium anomaly. No radiation anomaly. And they concluded the evidence for massive biomass burning at Murray Springs simply was not there. The argument did not end. A more recent study reported shocked quartz at the Younger Dryas boundary at 3 Clovis sites, Murray Springs among them. Critics answer that the hypothesis still has not converged into one coherent scenario, and that no crater of the right age has ever been found. That is the whole thing in one sentence. 2 teams of scientists sampled the same black stripe of dirt at the same site and published in the same journal. One describing a cosmic catastrophe, the other reporting that the evidence isn't there. It became a National Historic Landmark in 2012. The trenches are backfilled. What is there now is 1/3 of a mile of interpretive trail, 10 wayside exhibits, and grassland with the Huachuca Mountains on the horizon. You stand at an arroyo edge looking at a dark band in a wall of dirt, and 20 years of very careful science still cannot tell you what drew it. Number 3. In 1934, a river party running the Colorado through Marble Canyon stopped at a cave in the cliff wall and found small animal figures made of twisted willow. They assumed they had found children's toys. Stanton's cave sits above the river around mile 31 inside Grand Canyon National Park. There is no road and no trail, You reach it by rafting roughly 32 miles down from Lee's Ferry and then climbing the talus. It is one of the hardest sites to get to in the state. In 1954, the archaeologist Robert Euler excavated it and recovered more than 100 more. In total, around 165 have come out of that cave, the richest concentration known anywhere. Each one is made from a single twig, usually willow or squaw bush, split down most of its length and folded and wrapped into a deer or a bighorn sheep, sometimes with horns. One cataloged example stands 12.7 centimeters tall and 15.5 long, made from a twig half a centimeter thick. They are about 4,000 years old. The toy theory collapsed on the details. These caves show no evidence of anyone ever living in them. They are remote and difficult, and the figurines are not scattered on the floor. They are carefully placed and then cairns of rock are built over them. Some are pierced through with a second stick, like a miniature spear, and some are packed with the dung of the very animal they depict. A hunt performed in effigy, in the dark, and then hidden under stone. The professional consensus is that they relate to hunting ritual, which is a careful way of saying nobody knows. Nobody knows why they had to be buried. Nobody knows why the maker walked that far to leave them. The cave held other things. Bones of species that no longer exist in the Grand Canyon, California condor, Harrington's mountain goat, and a driftwood pile dated to over 35,000 years in 1969, recalculated to 43,500 in 1984, and now redated to 56,000. It is closed today. A bat-friendly steel gate covers the entrance, put there after archaeological disturbance in the 1970 seconds nearly wiped out the colony inside. The figurines sit in museum collections, including the Smithsonian. River trips still float underneath it. Most people on board glance up at a dark opening in the red wall limestone and never learn that somebody once carried a folded willow deer all the way up there on purpose to leave it under a rock. Number 2. The most important thing at Casa Malpais is a place you are not allowed to go, and never will be. The site sits on a black basalt lava flow, a Malpais, a badland, at around 7,000 feet in the White Mountains outside Springerville. Mogollon people built here in the mid-1200s and stayed until roughly 1400. 50 to 60 rooms, terraced onto 5 platforms cut into the basaltic cliffs. They did not build around the lava flow, they built into it. The rock is shot through with deep fissures from when it cooled and cracked, and beneath the Pueblo, those fissures open into caves. The architecture threads straight through them. Frank Hamilton Cushing recorded the place in 1883 and called it the Fisher Pueblo. Then it sat, largely ignored, for a century. It was named a National Historic Landmark in 1964 and added to the National Register in 1966. And still very little happened until the town decided to develop it as an archaeological park and hired a contract archaeologist named John Homan. Clearing vines off the cliff, Homan found a spiral staircase built into the rock. He followed the fissures down, past sunbathing rattlesnakes. Beneath the Pueblo and its ceremonial gathering room, he found burial chambers, the only catacombs known in the prehistoric American West. The New York Times ran it in May 1991. Everything above ground is remarkable enough. A great rectangular stone kiva with windows and slots cut so that summer solstice light falls on carvings. Inside a solar calendar. Irrigation canals engineered in the valley below. And the roof beams for that kiva were carried roughly 20 miles overland by hand, with no wheels and no draft animals. But the catacombs were the discovery, and the discovery is what ended the digging. The Hopi and the Zuni objected to the disturbance of people they consider their ancestors. Springerville agreed. Hopi and Zuni spiritual leaders came, offered prayers, left offerings, and the catacombs were sealed. They will not be opened again. You can still visit on a guided tour that leaves from the museum on Main Street, March through November, weather permitting. 2 hours, 3/4 of a mile over loose volcanic rock. You walk the Pueblo, stand inside the Great Kiva, see the staircase and the calendar. The museum plays a film of Hopi and Zuni elders talking about their connection to this ground. The tour does not go below. It is the one part of this story where everybody ended up agreeing. Number 1. Ponderosa pine and juniper, and a low hill at the edge of a wooded valley. Wind moving through the pines and then stopping. To the west, the San Francisco peaks fill the entire skyline, a mountain sacred to the people whose ancestors lived on this hill. There is no sign, no marker, no fence, no trail, no plaque. Collapsed masonry under pine needles, and at the base of the slope, the shallow outlines of two-ball courts. Nothing here tells you what was found. This is Ridge Ruin, on Coconino National Forest land roughly 30 kilometers east of Flagstaff. Around 20 ground floor rooms, some once carrying a second story. Masonry, resembling the fine work at Chaco Canyon. A raised platform, 2 rock enclosures, small plazas. Eldon Face Sinagua, roughly 1100 to 1200. By the standards of 1932 archaeology, it was nothing. The kind of site you drove past on the way to somewhere famous. In the spring of 1939, the Museum of Northern Arizona put a crew on it under a WPA grant. John McGregor directing, Milton Wetherill as field foreman, about 50 men, depression labor on a depression wage. Under the floor of a room that had been filled with trash, they hid a grave. A man garbed from head to foot in turquoise shell and stone beads. Only fragments of the garments survived, but the beads are among the finest ever unearthed. The best pottery on the site, ceremonial pigments, painted miniature bows, carved wooden sticks with handles shaped as animal hooves and human hands, and 434 projectile points. Pueblo religious life does not encourage the accumulation of personal wealth. The assemblage was anomalous the moment it appeared, and it is still described in the literature as perhaps the richest burial ever found in the Puebloan Southwest. The excavators had no framework for it. The Hopi men working the dig did. They recognized the sticks. They knew which society those objects belonged to, and they understood immediately what kind of person was lying in that pit. Consultants were brought in before any interpretation was attempted, which was almost unheard of at the time, and they agreed the objects were ritual. Modern understanding of this man has been carried much further by Hopi archaeologists and cultural advisors, who tied the objects to the Motswimi Society. 434 points is not one man's arrows. It is a mass deposit laid down in the final stages of a long funeral by a great many people, each of them apparently contributing. McGregor published the site in 1941 and the burial in 1943, under a phrase that has stuck ever since: the burial of an early American magician. And then, decades later, under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, the entire assemblage went back to the Hopi tribe. Where it went and what was done with it is legally confidential. The richest grave ever found in the Southwest is no longer available to science. What remains is a hill with nothing written on it, a set of photographs, and a bulletin printed in Flagstaff in February 1941. He was found by men who already knew him. Everyone since has been guessing. There are far more of these than one list can hold, and Arizona is full of ground that nobody has finished arguing about. My own favorite is Sears Point because 10,000 carvings sit out there in complete silence with no way to date a single one. Which of these caught you off guard? And which site did we miss? Subscribe and we will keep going.